53-year-old Adrian Dalby and 66-year-old Melvin Gravitz have been named as the two men who tragically lost their lives and killed in yesterday's terror attack outside Heaton Park Congregation Synagogue.
Well, we're joined now by former National Coordinator for Counter-terrorism Policing, Nick Aldworth, and the government's independent advisor on anti-Semitism, Lord John Mann. Lord Mann, if we can come to you first of all, please. It was only in July that you were one of the co-authors of this key report that was looking into anti-Semitism, to safety, with 10 recommendations. This must have been something that you were very aware and fearful of, but just dreaded ever coming.
Yeah, there was an expectation in the community that this kind of atrocity could happen, might happen, probably would happen here. But as well, people haven't experienced it before. It's, in a sense, extraordinary that it's been many, many, many decades since anything like this has happened in the United Kingdom. And across the rest of the world, including the rest of Europe, this has been happening over the last 10 years and several times in the United States, with Jewish people being murdered simply and solely because they're Jewish. This is the first time for a very, very long time it's happened in the United Kingdom. And I think the realisation as that dawns, the shock in the Jewish community, will lead to an increasing demoralisation that we need to do something to try and counter. But as well, it's a moment for the country to think that the people just going about their everyday lives, you know, doing normal things, going on their major religious day, the biggest religious day for the Jewish community, to go to their synagogue, are murdered simply and solely because they're Jewish. I think that's a moment for the country to pause and think what on earth's going on.
I couldn't agree more. I think we all feel the same way. Sometimes images say a lot, don't they? And when we saw those images of the extraordinary rabbi that barred the door at the synagogue, wearing his white robes, which I believe are called kittel, symbol of purity and hope, and on such a special day, and then seeing people saying there that they could see blood on the bottom of it. To think that's happening in our country is terrifying. Look, you co-authored this report. The Prime Minister says he wants to keep people secure, the Jewish community to feel and be secure. What would your recommendations to the Prime Minister be?
Well, I mean, I'm in regularly, and you know, some of this stuff is always best never made public in terms of the systems. But we have to reevaluate and look at the security systems. Even in yesterday's atrocity, it could have been far worse without the systems that are already in place and have been for the last 20 years. As this isn't the first terror attack that's attempted to kill people in the Jewish community. There's been quite a number that have been successfully stopped in the past. We need to look at and assess, and this is already a process has begun and been done by the appropriate people in the security services, in the police, but with the Jewish community involved as well, to assess and look. I'm certain that one thing that won't be a barrier to any improvements that are needed is money. I'm quite certain of that. But I think it's bigger than that, because we need to, I think, be doing more and thinking through how to do more and getting to the root of the problem. You know, why is someone choosing to go and murder Jewish people who he doesn't know in a street, what appears to be in his hometown? Why are people thinking that they can do that? And why are there a lot of people out there, even yesterday, who are not exactly cheering on but carrying on their onslaught against the Jewish community. You know, one of the more extraordinary things yesterday, there was another synagogue nowhere near Manchester, where in the afternoon, in the knowledge of what had happened, those going in and out of the synagogue were being abused by a group of people in a van outside. I mean, what's going on when people think that that's something appropriate to do in the context of what's just happened? Yeah. So that's where we're going to need to pay more attention, both on the security side and reassessing and reevaluating that. And that I'm confident that the processes needed to do that will happen and are already kicking in. Okay. But also in terms of the prevention side, because I think there's a lot more can be done and needs to be done in relation to that. And for me, in terms of the influence I have, that will be absolutely the number one priority.
Lord Mann, thank you. And, you know, we haven't heard about that incident in the synagogue, but I think with the words that you say, the fact that we all have to be far more aware, and we know that this hatred exists, and you ask absolutely right questions. Why on earth does this hatred exist? And these are questions we all have to answer ourselves, I think. Nick Alderworth, former head of policing and security at the UK Parliament. I must stress also you were Detective Chief Superintendent in Counter-terrorism policing, where you held the role of national coordinator. So you'll know a thing or two about what goes on at this point. Before we get into some of that, actually, can I just ask, where were you yesterday morning where you heard about this? Because I know you've spoken to some people who said you weren't surprised in a way that this took place.
So we've known for a long time that this day was coming, and we were very well prepared for it. Policing, alongside our incredible colleagues in the Community Security Trust, which is a government-funded and community-funded protective security body, driven and run and largely staffed by the Jewish community, put a significant amount of resource around the High Holy Day period. In London, which used to be my responsibility, is probably across time the second, third largest policing operation we ran every year. So reflecting Lord Mann's comment there that, you know, this is something that they feared for decades. It's something we've been prepared for decades, and I would like to think that the level of attention being paid to that community perhaps is why we haven't seen an attack sooner, but it is something we're expecting to come. Interestingly, yesterday morning I was passing through Parsons Green. I was head of protective security for London in 2017, and so Parsons Green had a particular resonance with me, and I was commenting on social media about it, so I actually missed that this had happened. But the same principles were the same, which was that the community and the people involved in those incidents were drawn together to look after themselves. And that is where we are, I'm afraid, in the world. We live in a world where terrorism has been franchised to the lowest common denominator. Anybody can be a terrorist using anything as a weapon against any target at any time. And it's how we equip and mobilise our society to respond to those incidents and how to become resilient in the face of them that I think is the key to moving forward.
Nick, the thing that a lot of people will be worried about, and people in the Jewish communities up and down the country, and quite frankly all communities across the country, would be, are there going to be copycat attacks? Are there going to be revenge attacks? What's your thoughts on that from what you know so far? Are you able to make a judgment as to whether they will be similar attacks or whether they might be reprisals?
So I think I'm mindful of speculating too much, but equally we do know that on the 22nd of March in 2017, the first attack which ran across Westminster Bridge and into Parliament was a trigger event for other attacks across that year. There are lots of environmental factors why attacks take place and why they don't take place. Geopolitics plays out, and very clearly at the moment across the world is writ large. I think it's a possibility. I think the fact that yesterday we saw people mobilising onto the streets, which felt like celebratory. It was awful. I was actually trying to get down Whitehall last night when that was going on. I worry that we are sufficiently polarised for these things to happen. I think it's also worth reflecting that this actually isn't the first event of this type this year. There were 3 men convicted earlier this year in Manchester of plotting attacks against mosques and synagogues, members of the extreme right. And so things are pretty febrile out there at the moment. We need to be aware of it. We need to be alert to it. I don't think we need to be alarmed. You know, the day we become alarmed and the day we start battening down the hatches and living outside of our societal norms is the day that we have yielded to the pressures that these people put us under.
Nick, it's interesting you mentioned those protests because that's something that we're all thinking about right now. There's, you know, what people refer to as pro-Palestinian protests. I understand that a lot of them will say that they were there because of the flotilla being intercepted that's on its way to Israel. One of them had Greta Thunberg on board. But it's really worrying, somebody with your vast experience and your knowledge, that you refer to it as they look celebratory. I mean, that is really concerning if that's the perception that you had from those protests.
Well, that's how it felt. So I was trying to get to another media interview at Millbank and I couldn't get through in my cab down Embankment. So I jumped out the cab, tried to run down Whitehall, where that was completely blocked because there was a really significant public order event occurring there by sheer volumes. And of course, I can't speak to what their motives were, but it felt to me as if it was celebratory. There was a very significant counter presence of Jewish people who were singing in response, really trying to, I think, calm things down and present a peaceful alternative, which of course is very different to some of those conflicts we see down Whitehall.
Yeah, Nick, I think you make a very good point about being very mindful, and I think everyone needs to be mindful, including those people that are on those protests. Lord Mann, can I just come back to you, because I understand that you spent some time yesterday with some volunteers at a volunteer centre near Salford, and in the end, at this point in time, we can look to the future, look ahead, but right now, our immediate thoughts have to be with that community around Heaton Park, around Manchester. What was, I mean, what was the mood like? I guess what the mood was like, but what kind of things were you hearing? Are they worried about their future? What's happening tomorrow, the next week, the week after that?
And the spirit of them.
Of course, people are incredibly worried, scared, and you know, I went into Manchester, and I was asked to do, and I needed to do various things. So I based myself with the volunteers where they were being organised, and what was extraordinary, there were two things that were extraordinary. The first was, you know, I'm there kind of getting on doing my job, and I'm there eating a Kit Kat, having been on numerous phone calls, and people coming up to me to thank me for being there. And it was almost a little surreal because these are the people who were literally yesterday in the front line. And I talked to them about what they'd been doing. And they weren't the eyewitnesses because they were passers-by. They were eyewitnesses because they were doing a voluntary job, the volunteers from the Jewish community. And there was one young man there, and he could have been my grandson. He was very young. Who in a very matter-of-fact way came up to me. And what he'd done, he was the first person to put tourniquets on some of those who'd been injured. And this incredibly young man, I asked him, well, how are you feeling? And he said, it's my job. But it's not his job. He's a volunteer. And I kind of had gone into Manchester incredibly depressed, not really wanting to be there at all, feeling it was appropriate. I mean, I went there to stand in solidarity, do my work alongside those volunteers and simply be there and say, look, the rest of you are with you. And that's why they would come up to me saying thank you. They weren't thanking me for doing it, they're thanking me for being there with them. But actually, it's them who are the incredible heroism and that glimmer of light that came out towards the end of the day, listening to what they'd done, the resilience, the brilliance, the bravery, the courage of these Jewish volunteers, many of them very, very young. That's what kind of, I think, needs to keep us going in this darkest of times for the Jewish community and for the country, because that resilience, that willingness to put something back in, that glimmer of light, I mean, that is That is where we need to be going today, as we work through what we need to do. That's the best of Britain, that's the best of society, and that's what we need to be also concentrating on today, not just the worst of society, the evil.
Well said, well said. Thank you very much indeed to both of you, but you're absolutely right. We have to hold on to that, don't we? And turn that glimmer of light into a fire, because that's what we need to do for our country. Thank you very much indeed to both of you.
Yeah, we're joined now by author and great-grandson of Auschwitz survivor Lily Ebert, Dov Foreman, and someone who spent time at Heaton Park Synagogue in her childhood and even got married there back in 1967. The first wedding at then the new synagogue. Former chair of the Labour Friends of Israel, Dame Louise Ellman. Dame Louise, we'll come to you in just a moment, but Dov, you're here in the studio. Let me come to you. We all remember your lovely grandmother. She's been on the show. We've interviewed her. I just before we were coming to you, you're such a young man, and you've done so much already. You've spoken so greatly. How are you feeling this morning?
We're a community in mourning. We're a community grieving, still reeling from the events almost 2 years ago of October 7th and now this, on our holiest of holy days. And I was in synagogue yesterday and it reminded me of the October 7th attacks, when the news was trickling in and you're not able to verify. And our immediate thoughts were, could this be our friends? Could this be our family? Some of my friends live on the road of that synagogue and their families attend that synagogue. They weren't there, they were in another synagogue. And when Yom Kippur came out at around 7:30 last night, all we were trying to do as a family was to frantically check, was it someone in our family, one of our friends who had been murdered or had been injured? And first and foremost, our thoughts go out and our prayers go to the families of those who were murdered and their names released this morning made it all the more real, and also to those who are now fighting for their lives in hospital. And there have been messages going around WhatsApp groups in the Jewish community to ask that people still pray for these people, because some of them are in critical condition, and we hope and pray that they have a full and speedy recovery.
And your wonderful grandmother, Lily, a Holocaust survivor, it's getting very close when she passed away a year ago. That must add an extra resonance for you.
Well, I'm so glad that she isn't alive now to see this. How shocked, well, not shocked, how saddened she would be to see this. And none of the Jewish community is shocked today, because we've been warning about this, not just for the last 2 years, but for the last 20 years. Since the early 2000s, the government, and we're appreciative of this, but the government have poured millions upon millions of pounds for security in schools, in synagogues, in our community centres, outside Jewish shops and in our areas. But all that was doing really was trying to stop the spread of the fire, never tackling the root cause. And it's time that we come together as a society and we try and actually root out this cancer in society of anti-Semitism, of anti-Jew hate. And we need to decide as a society, every community, every town, every political leader needs to decide, are we going to make this country safe again for the British Jewish community? Because I can tell you that in synagogue yesterday, thousands of Jews were telling me that they don't feel that they want to raise their children in this country and they are thinking of leaving. And I am thinking that too. I'm only 21 years old. I don't have a family yet, but I'm thinking, is this the country that I want to raise my children in? And I know that the only way to change that and the only way to make sure that the proud, British, patriotic Jewish community, which is well integrated, which has set up businesses, which pays taxes, which is so proud to be British, and who came here as refugees, escaping this very persecution, escaping this anti-Jew hatred. I know that we will consider leaving, and we have to leave if we don't root this out. And again, of course, it's appreciated that money goes towards security, but that's not tackling the issue, and we need to begin confronting that head on.
You're wearing a kippah this morning, a very visible symbol of being Jewish. Do you feel that there's going to be people who are fearful for being that prominent now? What would you say to youngsters going to school this morning? You know, the fear is real.
100%. We're a community besieged. We're a community besieged by security, behind barbed wire, behind larger fences. And again, we can't just keep building those fences ever higher and those doors ever thicker to protect us from shootings or stabbings. And again, yesterday, thankfully, the incredibly well-trained security guards were able to lock the doors and stop that man coming in. But imagine how much worse it would have been if he was able to get in. And I don't ever remember a time when I went to school that on the first day of school, when you're introduced to your new teachers and new classrooms, especially in primary school, that you weren't also introduced to the new code words for that year in school, for if there was an attack, where you would hide under your desks, you would turn the lights off, you would lock the doors, you would close the curtains, and you would wait to hear this code word, and only then you would come out knowing that it was safe and that there wasn't an actual attack. And we would practice that drill every 2 or 3 months, and that's the reality that Jewish people in Britain live in. How sad that is, that that's how it's come. And, you know, I drive past churches in my area every Sunday, and even also mosques, and you don't see the level of security. In fact, outside churches, you don't see security at all, or anyone checking who's coming in. But outside synagogue, every single week, there are bag searches. There's I go to the largest synagogue in the country, where I think there were over 1,000 people over the weekend. And there was so much security there, police vans, and it's incredibly frightening. And there will be Jews who are scared, but also there will be Jews who say that we won't be cowed by this. And when the British troops went into Bergen-Belsen after liberation, including with Jewish chaplains, they cried out, and of course they were mourning and they were community and grieving like we are today. But they also cried out, Am Yisrael Chai, that the Jewish people live. And today the Jewish people live, and we will continue to live, and will continue to live in this country as proud Jews. But we can only continue to live in this country as proud Jews if the silent majority wakes up, if they continue to stand by us, and if people and governments say that they're actually going to do something about this, not just send more money for security.
Well, you
So
put
well
that so
said.
eloquently, Dov, and it's very important words, and we're going to put some of this to Shabana Mahmood later. But let's speak to Dame Louise Ellman, who's the chair of the Labour Friends of Israel. Dame Louise, you grew up in this area as a child. You got married at the synagogue in Heaton Park. Sorry, I know you're former chair, by the way, I might say chair. But tell us about that community. What's your memories of being around that community in Heaton Park?
Well, this is a very peaceful community, a community where people live well together, and I have very happy memories of a childhood brought up here. I attended Heaton Park Shul Synagogue regularly and with my family. I was married in the synagogue in 1967, and my son had his bar mitzvah here. So it's a very familiar place to me, and I'm very upset but not surprised about what happened yesterday, about the dreadful terrorist attack. It is horrific. And it's extremely upsetting, and it's personal as well. But the whole of the Jewish community is very, very upset by this. But I don't think many people will be surprised that this happened. No one expected it to happen here in Manchester, but there isn't a surprise that there was an attack on the Jewish community. And the fears of anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish hatred has been building up for some time now, and the community have been extremely concerned and extremely upset.
I can hear the emotion in your voice. I think we can, and it's completely understandable. What changes have you seen in the community that you say was always so peaceful, that you had your wedding there, and what next needs to be done?
Well, people live well together in this area, but in the Jewish community generally, there has been a growing concern over the last couple of years, and particularly in the last few months. It seems to be that the terrorist Hamas attack, the murder of over 1,000 Israelis in their homes 2 years ago, has somehow led to an outpouring of hatred towards Jewish people on the streets of this country. It's absolutely incredible and absolutely horrific. And there has been a feeling of hatred, whether it's hatred on the streets and hate speech, people feeling concerned at schools, students at universities, and even people going to our NHS hospitals expressing concern about some of the statements that they've heard there and things that they've seen from medical people in hospitals. And this has built up. The community has been very concerned. So I don't think there'll be many people who are surprised that this has happened, but it is intolerable, and it doesn't represent what is a very good society here in the UK. The Jewish community here is very well established. It's a very loyal community. We're very much part of society. And it's time that people recognise just what was happening. I think we need vigilance, security, yes, but also an intolerance of hate speech. Hate should not be normalised in the way that's happened in the last couple of years, and particularly in the last few months. And perhaps we need more education too, so that people understand what anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish racism actually is.
And yet, Dame Louise, I hear from other people from that area, and would love to know your thoughts on this, that actually we know there's a Muslim community right next door to the Jewish community. They sort of live side by side and have done so for many, many years. So there is evidence to show that communities can get on. What's your experience of that cohesion right there in Heaton Park?
Well, communities can get on, and communities, including here, indeed do get on. So it's not about communities as a whole. People can live very peacefully together, but within communities, there are always people perhaps who are filled with hatred and who misunderstand the situation, who want to bring grievances from other countries over to this country, misunderstand what's happening, and are ignorant. And there are people who simply do not understand what anti-Jewish hatred is. So those are the things that we have to tackle. It's not about most people, but it's about people who become filled with hatred and then are able to act out their hatred, leading to murders and terrorism like we saw here in Manchester yesterday.
OK. Dame Louise, thank you.
And Dov, just maybe one final word to you. We're going to be speaking to the Home Secretary in a moment. What would you say to her, and is there a message of hope that you can give to the whole country, and particularly fearful Jews?
Well, let me start with a message for the government and for the Home Secretary. You can't feign surprise, you can't feign shock, as the Prime Minister did yesterday, when you've allowed calls for an intifada, for the very thing that we saw yesterday in Manchester. When you've allowed those calls to go unchecked and unchallenged, you can't then be surprised that what these people are calling for happens. And of course, not everyone on the marches is calling for hatred and violence against Jews. There are people
talking about protests.
Exactly. There are people who are going because they genuinely are concerned about the situation in Israel and in Gaza, and that's fine. And I'm a big proponent of free speech, and people should have the right to protest.
Well,
but to do that and to shout intifada until victory, to chant for a global intifada, to chant for jihad, and then for that to happen, there's a direct link between the two. And just to add to that, the Prime Minister said yesterday in his tweet that he will do everything to protect the Jewish community. 2 hours after the attack, we saw people across the UK hold emergency protests. What they said was for the Gaza flotilla. But in those emergency protests, there were again people chanting for intifada, chanting for intifada until victory, and chanting for jihad, and celebrating and clapping the murders of 2 innocent Jews.
We will put that to the Home Secretary, who has come out and actually said she was very disappointed that the protests went ahead. Do you have a message of hope?
Well, look, a message of hope again would be to say that the British Jewish community, we're a proud British community, and we want to see Britain get back to those British values of tolerance. My great-grandmother always came on the show and said how proud she was of how tolerant and how liberal the British community was, and how they accepted her and countless other Holocaust survivors to rebuild their lives here in the UK. And we know that the UK can get back to that, and as they have done in the past 24 hours to the Jewish community, can show so much solidarity. So we do have hope, but again, that hope needs to translate into action, because words are cheap, but we need action.
OK, Dov Foreman, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real... it's very important for you to be with us this morning, so thank you.